So with cold exposure specifically, this is gaining a lot of traction recently in the research and the online community. From an expert, what do we need to know about cold exposure?
The funny thing is, the interest in cold plunge probably peaked over a year ago now. It's much more popular on social media to bash cold plunge and ice baths than it is to promote it. And so you might see Stacy Sims or Peter Attia or Lane Norton or somebody saying, well, those ice baths don't work. The headlines that are negative on ice baths are much more popular right now than the headlines that are positive. And some of the misconceptions that have been so persistent in social media are going to stay there because they keep getting clicks. I don't know how people missed, Joe Rogan and Andrew Huberman telling them this, and maybe they really know. Do not do your ice bath after your workout. Pre-cool your workout. Craig Heller's work at Stanford University is definitive on this. When you extract heat from your body before you do your exercise or in between sets, which is called percooling, you will keep your mitochondria cool. You will boost your peak power output and you will extend your endurance. So if you do your ice bath before your workout, you'll set a new personal best. If you do your ice bath after your workout, you will blunt the inflammation. You will reduce your testosterone instead of increase it. And you will cut into what Huberman calls hypertrophy. That is the mechanisms inside the body that build more muscle. So whenever you see a headline that says, well, ice baths don't work, they're usually talking about using the ice bath in the wrong way. Now, that might be the way you learned in high school. I don't know, from your football coach or something, and you're supposed to ice your knees after practice. But that's not the way to do it. We now know better. Pre-cool your exercise and then use sauna to accelerate your recovery from your workout. The better way to do it is cold, exercise, sauna. But as yet, at least to my knowledge, nobody's really done the clinical trials that demonstrate whether that triple stack is like more effective. There's some really good stuff on cold bath and then exercise. And there's some really good stuff on exercise and then sauna for recovery. But nobody's done the whole sandwich yet.
It's interesting to hear you say that. And I'm happy that you talked about those different angles because I had heard about this first from Mike Israetel, where he was talking about from specifically the muscle hypertrophy and muscular strength standpoint, that he had seen someone like Chris Bumstead, who was like a Olympia winner for several years. And he was like, you should never do ice baths following a lifting session because it might be blunting hypertrophy. And everyone in the lifting community was like, nope, don't do it. Don't do it. You're going to ruin your gains. But and then I hear Stacy Sims talking about it. I hear, Rogan talking about it. And I was interested from it from the perspective of like the hormonal health and how it makes you feel happy and more relaxed and just optimizing like norepinephrine and dopamine and oxytocin. And I love that idea. And I honestly never heard of it before. Cold exercise sauna. I'd never heard of that before. And that should be talked about a whole lot more.
It should be, but the really big accounts aren't saying anything about it. The really big accounts are getting it wrong. If you hear an influencer say, if you sauna 45 minutes a week, you reduce your all-cause mortality by 90 jillion percent. What that account is not telling you is that in Finland, sauna means hot and cold. And you can go to the literature, whether it's epidemiological or clinical in Finland. You can read, Jari Laukkanen's work. And he will explain in his experimental methods that by sauna, they mean thermal contrast therapy. There's always a cooling period that accompanies the heating. It's just that when that gets oversimplified, on English social media, people forget to tell you about the cooling part. And you walk away with the misconception thinking that it's only about the hot box. Well, probably if you're only doing the heat it feels good, and there's some health benefits. But you can't count on the research coming out of Finland. You can't count on having the same benefits when you're not having the same experience. So there's so many popular misconceptions on social media. You're not the first person to tell me, oh, I'd never heard about this thing that makes all kinds of sense, because I didn't see it on one of those more popular accounts.
It's funny too because um, contrast therapy too has been gaining a whole lot more traction as well. And I know that with respect to a lot of folks who really take things to the nth degree, maybe like ultra marathon runners, some of them like to do the contrast therapy and some of them don't. What is your experience with that? Even as far as like blood pressure fluctuations with the vasodilation and vasoconstriction and people getting a little bit lightheaded, do they kind of need to ramp things up? Do they need to stay hydrated? How would you go about detailing contrast therapy?
There are two things. The first thing we're going to talk about is hormesis. More is not better. You want to be in the sweet spot of the upside down U hormetic curve. So this is the hormetic curve means if you don't do enough, your health suffers. If you do some, your health gets better. And then if you do too much, your health suffers again. And so a lot of studies, in particular with testosterone, they might give a supplement to, I don't know, the football team on some college campus. And they say, oh, look, we got a 20% increase in total testosterone in these, fit, trained young men by giving them, I don't know, ashwagandha or Tongkat Ali or something like this. And some other guy comes along and he says, well, I'm going to triple the dose. I'll get it such a stronger signal. But then testosterone in that cohort goes down. And people are confused. They think the research is conflicting. No, it's not. Testosterone, like all sex steroids, are made in the mitochondria. The mitochondria produce a steroid called pregnenolone, and they do it by converting cholesterol. That pregnenolone then is further metabolized into every single sex hormone in the body, whether it's testosterone or estradiol or any of the others. And so if you don't have enough mitochondria or your mitochondria are damaged or dysfunctional, of course, your sex hormone synthesis suffers and you have low sex hormone levels. When you boost your mitochondria, then your body is better at synthesizing these sex hormones, including testosterone. Exercise will boost mitochondria. Ice bath is the best way to stimulate mitobiogenesis. But if you do too much exercise, you damage the mitochondria. They need recovery time. It can mean several days. If you do too much ice bath, you overstress the mitochondria and they will need several days of recovery. You need light, dark. You need exercise. You need rest. You need fasting. You need feasting. You need a variety. You need to go back and forth between the extremes. More is not necessarily better. And so some people have been overdoing it. So that's the one thing that we had to talk about was the hormetic curve is looking for just enough and not too much. The other one is when it comes to thermal contrast therapy, is I was just at an event this morning and people were going out of the cold plunge and into the hot tub. And it feels all right, but you're not getting vasodilation in the hot tub. In the cold plunge, you get vasoconstriction. So to defend your core body temperature, your body will shut down circulation to your extremities and to your skin. And this reduced blood flow keeps the blood in the core where the central organs can stay warm. When you get into the dry sauna, the only way to cool the body off is to sweat out. The sweat evaporates from your skin and it carries the heat of evaporation with it. It doesn't happen in the hot tub. In the hot tub, you can't evaporate into the water. There's a phenomena called hydromiosis. Your skin knows when it's already saturated with water and it will not sweat. So how does your body defend your core temperature from getting too high in the hot tub? Vasoconstriction. It shuts down the circulation to your skin and your limbs. Anything that's underwater will be experiencing vasoconstriction in the wet heat. And that means if you're combining hot tub with cold plunge, you go from vasoconstriction to vasoconstriction. How the hell is that a smooth muscle tissue workout? Go dry heat and wet cold. I'm not really knocking the hot tub. We now make, it's called a mineral bath. And so it goes to 104 degrees like every hot tub. But the Morosco mineral bath has 3 attributes that fix what's really wrong with American hot tubs. First, it's made of stainless steel and it's grounded. So you are connected to the electrons in the earth, just like in all the Morosco ice baths. Second, there's no chlorine in a Morosco mineral bath. We use exclusively ozone for disinfection. So you're not poisoning yourself when you get into the water. And you can put as much minerals or as much mineral salt, I should specify sulfate salt in it, as you like. The last thing is every single natural hot spring in the world comes out of the ground in a reductive state. That is, has negative ORP because, it's heated up by some ancient volcano. It's not exposed to oxygen. And it is the sulfur sulfate chemistry that controls the electrochemistry, the redox potential of that water. So we've installed a hydrogen machine in our mineral bath that allows you to convert it from ozone disinfection to hydrogen bathing. Now you get the salt, you get the grounding, and you get the electronegativity. That is the negative ORP from the hydrogen. And we call it the next best thing to the natural hot spring. I think it's wonderful. For people who will not ice bath, you can still remedy chronic oxidative stress in a hydrogen bath. So we make one. But I don't recommend that people combine it with their ice bath. I'd still much rather, for thermal contrast therapy, that they do wet, cold, and dry heat in a high temperature, traditional Finnish sauna. When you get out of the ice bath and your skin temperature has dropped and you're feeling a little bit of shiver, an infrared sauna at 145 Fahrenheit is not going to cut it. You'll be in there for an hour before you begin to sweat. You got to go into that traditional 200 Fahrenheit degree Finnish sauna. And now it's only 20 minutes before you get your sweat on and you can go back into the ice bath, go back and forth. You mentioned that there will be blood pressure impacts. And of course there are, because the vasoconstriction increases your blood pressure. Hypertension is the number one contraindication to ice bath. If you already have chronic high blood pressure, the ice bath is going to make it higher. So consult your physician. Start at warmer temperatures. Then you go into the sauna and the opposite happens. Vasodilation can drop your blood pressure. And sure enough, I was at Mike Mutzel's house. He's got a wood stove fired sauna. It'll go up to 225 if he lets it. And then, of course, he's got a Morosco, which is at 33 degrees. And I went back and forth and I got a little spinny. I was having like my transcendent hallucinatory experience just based upon the thermal contrast therapy. It was a pleasant experience. I wasn't worried about myself. But I mentioned it to Mike. He goes, yeah, that happens sometimes when you go extreme heat to extreme cold. The circulation in the brain and all the neurotransmitters take you to an altered state of consciousness. This is not a recommendation. This is just something that I experienced that said, maybe I took it a little bit too far.
No, that's a very fair way of saying it, because there's like so many, there are people who do these contrast therapies, and just like anything else, you kind of have to progressively overload to get yourself to the point where you're like, okay, like let's dial this up a little bit as well. And it was funny, like as you were talking about this, I was taking some notes on the hydrogen bath, like the H2 bath reduces oxidative stress. And that's one of those funny things, because I think we learned about that in like, Chem 1, as far as like what's a redox reaction, and reduction is gain and oxidation is loss of electrons. So if like you're donating things back, specifically those protons, you can really reduce the oxidative damage. And it's funny because I think a lot of people would think this is kind of like a little bit out there, but when you just write it out on like a chemistry, almost like stoichiometry, it makes a whole lot of sense with respect to, we are organic, the earth is organic, what we eat typically is organic. So it makes perfect sense. And these are just using your scientific knowledge in order to quite literally heal us. but we haven't really been in touch too much with the environment, with our electrons, with the food that we eat in order to optimize health for the long term.
Most of America does suffer from chronic oxidative stress, and there are reasons for it. The mitochondria are the locus of respiration. This is an incredible thing where there's oxygen in the atmosphere and we can combine it with the hydrocarbons, in our bloodstream, whether that's glucose or triglycerides or medium chain fatty acids, all the things that we're now into, that our mitochondria can metabolize by combining them with oxygen and extracting energy. The downside of all the electron transfers that the mitochondria have to facilitate is something called reactive oxygen species. Now, in small quantities, hey, they're great. They stimulate what's called mitobiogenesis. It's a good example of a hormetic stressor. But when it's too much, those reactive oxygen species will scavenge electrons from anything that they can find. Typically, it's melatonin. Mitochondria make their own melatonin, and those melatonin, they sacrifice electrons to neutralize the ROS. If your mitochondria are so overworked that they are out of the melatonin they make themselves, then the ROS will attack mitochondrial DNA. And it shouldn't be a surprise that if you don't have intact, healthy mitochondrial DNA, the mitochondria cannot produce the enzymes required to metabolize everything. That mtDNA damage can be repaired, but it takes rest and it takes dark. If you're constantly eating highly processed foods, if you're constantly feeding yourself carbohydrates, your mitochondria never get the rest that they need so that they can rejuvenate via mitophagy, that is removal of the damaged mitochondria, and mitobiogenesis, the generation of new mitochondria. What the cold plunge does is stimulate that mitobiogenesis. Most adult human beings in the Western industrialized, educated countries have lost all of their brown fat. The studies at the Sloan Kettering Institute of Cancer patients showed that those over the age of 40, only 5% of them had any detectable brown fat. And that means 95% of the people are walking around without this essential organ, which is meant to defend their core body temperature, meant to modulate their thyroid function and help control their metabolism, meant to produce neuroprotective factors that reduce the risk of dementia and heal the brain. And they just don't have any. Well, when you get into the cold and you begin to feel that urge to shiver, your body will respond by recruiting new brown fat. And what makes it brown? Mitochondria. A brown fat cell will have thousands of mitochondria organelles in it, compared to dozens in a white fat cell. The mitochondria perform the cold thermogenesis function inside the brown fat cell. And they didn't get there by, migrating from somewhere else in the body. They got there through mitobiogenesis. But then here's the thing that I just learned from Martin Picard at Columbia University. After you recruit new brown fat cells and you've made new mitochondria in them, then some of those mitochondria can be exported by the brown fat into your bloodstream and find other organs in the body to repair those cells with damaged mitochondria. He cited a paper in which the brown adipose tissue had released mitochondria into the bloodstream that then repaired heart muscle cells. This is profound because to think that you could target brown fat as a mitochondrial therapy, but then improve brain tissue or improve the function of heart muscle or bones because the mitochondria travel throughout the body is an extraordinary, therapeutic potential here that we're just beginning to learn about.
There's so many things that I want to unpack from all of that. And what's funny is I think one of the first things that you had brought up, which really got my mind spinning there, was you talked about this idea of mitochondrial biogenesis. And I've made like tons of videos on that, like specifically from like that angle back there of endurance training, of just like when you do like more zone 2 training, you build up more mitochondria or more engines within cells to help you exercise. That's just one like little tiny physiological piece of the puzzle. And what's funny is that if you remember, like when Michael Phelps was doing his run of, or his swim of the different, gold medals at the various Olympics for around 12 years, 16 years, they measured his body fat percentage and they found that he had more brown fat than like the yellow subcutaneous adipose tissue, which most people have around, like their belly, central adiposity, precursor for metabolic syndrome. And they're like, well, why did that happen? And the answer was like a lot of his physical activity. I mean, his diet wasn't great, but his physical activity helped him increase the amount of brown fat. And I was like, oh, that's like a cool little mechanism there. I had no idea about the brown fat increasing mitochondrial biogenesis. And those mitochondria can then be exported systemically to help other systems within the body. That's incredible. Is that something new which is being
Yeah,
researched right
this
now?
science is just a couple or 3 years old. I'm just starting to pull the papers on both the rodent models and the human studies that show both healthy and unhealthy mitochondria can be exported. And so the leading edge of this research is, do cancer cells export damaged mitochondria that then infect somehow other cells through the body? And it's a line of research, but I suspect that it's the other way around. That, and this is entirely underdeveloped right now. I suspect that cancers, which originates in defective mitochondria, is not exporting those defective mitochondria so they can be taken up by other cells. I suspect that they're exported so that their components can be recycled, so that they can be digested, that it's part of the mitophagy process is to get rid of the damaged mitochondria. They go into the bloodstream and they travel somewhere else where they can be taken apart and then reconstituted to some other component of the body. That's what I think. I think the inverse, which has not been as well studied, that healthy mitochondria are exported into the bloodstream and then can be imported by cells with damaged mitochondria, might be a therapy for cancer that explains why ketosis improves cancer treatment outcomes. When you listen to Thomas Seyfried, you think, well, he's got a really good critique of the somatic mutation theory. You come away thinking, I'm convinced that cancer originates in mitochondrial dysfunction. And then he says, to treat cancer, you need to starve the cancer cells, get the glucose down, get insulin down, and then press pulse, he says, glutamate, which is another metabolic substrate that cancer cells can ferment and then metabolize. He never says, fix the mitochondria inside the cancer cell. That's just not something he talks about. And maybe it's because it is brand new. If we could target mitochondria with the therapies and insert into the cancer cell, as Seyfried has done in the lab, a mitochondria organelle that will signal apoptosis in the cell, then the cancer cell will destroy itself. This might be why we see people who do cold plunge therapy shrink their tumors. That might be the mechanism by which Dean Hall, who swam, for 3 straight weeks, the entire 187 miles of the cold Willamette River, cured his own leukemia with cold water swimming, rather than what the medical establishment had for him, which was nothing. I get maybe a text message a month from people who said, I've started doing ice baths and my images are showing my tumor has shrunk. The only way to shrink the tumor is for cancer cells to be destroyed. And the immune system, no doubt, plays a role. The starvation of the cancer's metabolic substrate, no doubt, plays a role. But here we have this new possibility that we might be able to repair the mitochondrial function inside the cell and either fix the DNA or signal apoptosis to have the cancer cell destroy itself. That's what the National Cancer Institute should be funding, instead of the search for sequencing the genome to find the complex set of genes that might lead to an increased risk of cancer in an otherwise metabolically dysfunctional individual. We've been doing that for over 50 years and it hasn't played out.
Well, it's funny because with the gene sequencing, like they just came out with that book, probably within the last couple of years. Who was that lady who sequenced the genome and has been on the fight against cancer? I forget what the book was called. I listened to the audiobook of it, and it was like a really cool line of research, and they boiled it down to something like relatively easy, almost like the Feynman method, like explain to like a 5-year-old, explain to like an eighth grader of like, okay, like this is how this works. But like the way that cancer cells work is that there's going to be like some sort of like mutation within the DNA, within the nucleus,
Not
and it's going to
always.
like reprogram like really damaged cells, and it's going to metastasize, and that's why people die. But it almost seems like maybe like the answer is this, is like there's so many other contraindications leading up to that tumor, and the traditional therapy of something like radiation or even chemotherapy, which is like dropping an atomic bomb in your body and just waiting for it to go off. And you see someone walking around who's like very deathly ill, but if maybe not even stem cell treatment, but like, mitochondrial treatment, we could get them like healthy mitochondria to say, hey, there's something off here. Let's kill off the cancer cells and bring about like really, really healthy cells through that mitochondrial biogenesis. And with the guy that you were talking about, the swimming, that might be the answer. With the cold therapies, it's such a shock to the system that that's the strongest medication, so to speak, that we have.
Cold therapy does two things. This is a study in mice out of Sweden. I think it's 2022, and the first author is Seki. They took rodents. Now, these rodents are bred to die of cancer. I mean, that's the whole reason. These are research rodents. They implanted tumor cells, and they took the experimental group and subjected them to what I guess we would consider mild cold for something like 4 hours a day, comparing them to the control group that was kept at thermal neutrality. The tumors in the cold exposed group grew more slowly, and the mice lived longer. So I said, what's going on? And they did this extensive imaging, and they found that activating the brown fat in the rodents will preferentially clear glucose from the bloodstream. So that glucose will no longer be available to tumors. Now, something like 80% of tumor cells have genes that are upregulated for glucose metabolism. Glucose is the most important substrate for a tumor cell, but it's not the only one. There's some labs that have even shown cancer cells that can metabolize ketones. I want to say they don't like it, but the cancer cell can persist by fermenting glucose, some cancer cells fermenting glutamate, and I guess in some experimental conditions, even metabolizing ketones. In this study, it was brown fat clearing glucose from the bloodstream, to which they attributed the inhibition of tumor growth. Then they took a Hodgkin's patient, and this is somebody who'd been through 2-3 rounds of chemotherapy. They weren't done. And they said, we want to know if we can replicate the same activation of brown fat and see the same preferential uptake of glucose into the brown fat of a human being. And they did. There are some brown fat studies from rodents that do not translate well to human beings. But this one was so careful and so extensive that they imaged the same phenomena in the Hodgkin's patient. What they did not do was look at ketone chemistry. What they did not do was study the mitochondria. And so cold will clear glucose from the bloodstream. It will starve the cancer cells of their most important metabolic substrate. But here's the other thing. When it stimulates mitobiogenesis, it is possible, and I'm speculating now, it is possible that the new mitochondria can repair the function inside the damaged tumor cell and either return the tumor cell to normal, which Seifried has shown some evidence in the lab dish of, or signal the apoptosis that destroys the tumor cell. Remember, these rodents still died of cancer. The tumor cells still grew, but the cold therapy that they observed inhibited the growth of the cancer. For reversal, we probably need more than just starving the tumor cell. We probably need some type of therapy that is going to destroy the cancer cell and boost the mitochondria. Now, here's the problem with chemotherapy. The whole theory of chemotherapy is that you give the body just enough poison to kill the weakest cells. And cancer cells are more fragile than normal cells. Cancer cells are not as efficient at metabolizing glucose into the ATP they need for proliferation. And so if you dose the chemo, in theory, just right, you will kill those weak tumor cells. You'll damage every other cell in the body, but hopefully the tumor cells die first. It is far too easy to get the dosage wrong. It is far too easy to kill the patient with chemotherapy even before the cancer does. We don't talk about it. We don't publish a lot of papers on it. And it's impossible to tell whether it's the chemo that finished off the patient or some aspect of the cancer. But the theory of chemo is just enough poison, one shred above the death of the whole organism, and then you hopefully let the body come back without cancer. What chemo will not do is repair the mitochondria. So when you see refined carbohydrates, toast, ketchup with corn syrup on the plate of the, in the oncology ward where the patients are going through chemo and then eating this diet that does the opposite of support their mitochondria when they need their mitochondria the most. It probably breaks your heart like it does mine. We should be giving them magnesium. We should be keeping them in keto. We should be giving them a high-fat diet so that their mitochondria can be repaired and support their body. And sure enough, in the few trials where people have gone keto or done mitochondrial support therapies at the same time as other traditional cancer outcomes, guess what? The patients do better because cancer originates in mitochondrial dysfunction. When you fix the mitochondria, you got a much better shot at fixing the cancer. So we should talk about what damages mitochondria. The first thing is seed oils in your diet, which didn't used to exist until maybe 100 years ago when somebody figured out how to convert cottonseed into something they thought human beings could eat. So seed oils are predominantly omega-6 fatty acids. And those omega-6 fatty acids have a double bond in a different position than the omega-3. It gives them a different shape. When you eat too many seed oils, you don't metabolize all those calories. Those fatty acids are incorporated into your body as material. They make up the phospholipids that are your cell membranes. There are also your mitochondrial membranes. And when you put the double bond in the wrong place, it interferes with the membrane transport. And this impairs your mitochondrial function. Seed oils is the first one. Another one is poor light hygiene. So this would be non-native EMFs like your 5G Wi-Fi tower. This would be the blue light that you have at night that disrupts your sleep and the melatonin made inside your brain. When you expose your mitochondria to these wavelengths for which, you're just not designed to be exposed, you interfere with their function. Third one could be toxins, that is aluminum, lead, mercury, PFAS, chlorinated hydrocarbons like DDT, brominated flame retardants, all of these things, we talk about them, what's the cause of autism? There are so many different toxins and environmental exposures, but there is only one pathway, and it is through the mitochondria. So when you expose your mitochondria to the chemical toxins in the environment without arrest, then they're going to be constantly struggling to keep up with detoxifying your body and continuing their function despite the additional injury that you're exposing them to. So we've done seed oils, we've done light, we've done toxins, and there is one more that I'm trying to remember, one more route to mitochondrial injury that is probably, it's the excess and incessant carbohydrates. It is carbohydrates without any sort of a break. Now, you can eat the birthday cake. You can have an Oreo cookie, although I hate them. You can eat one if that's what you're into, but then you got to take a break. You got to get into fasting. You got to get into ketosis. You got to give your mitochondria a chance to come back. If you're snacking all the time, snacks didn't exist. There was no foil wrapped packaging, like if you go back before we had hot water showers. These things are fairly recent. Our grandparents didn't snack. They ate meals and they had a name for each meal. Snacking was something that was invented by the processed food industry to try and keep you buying food. And if you eat 5, 6, 7 times a day, your mitochondria will never get the break that they need to produce melatonin, to stimulate mitobiogenesis, to recover from the reactive oxygen species. To take care of your mitochondria, and I mean this literally, not metaphorically, to take care of your mitochondria is to take care of your life force. You are an organized flow of energy, and it is your mitochondria that are the bottleneck in your energy flow. So keep your light right. Get the seed oils out of your diet. Do some fasting. Put yourself in and out of ketosis. And to the extent that you can, get the environmental toxins out of your diet, whether that's glyphosate or aluminum or fluoride or mercury or lead or the PFAS or the microplastics or phthalates or BFRs, the brominated flame retardants. Get all of those things that interfere with your mitochondrial function out of your life.
It's funny, all the things that you're talking about are the genetics, epigenetics, and like the nutrigenomics of how do we continually make healthy mitochondria, healthy cells, and therefore healthy tissues. And like I teach a lot of nutrition. So my whole angle is on number 1 and number 4 that you talked about with respect to things that can hurt the mitochondria. Number 1, you talked about seed oils, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. And then you talked about like the carbohydrates. And one of my students asked me last week, who's like type 2 diabetic. They're like sort of middle aged. And they said, what do I do? And I was like, hey, if we look at the 3 primary monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, galactose, your body's not responding to glucose that well because you're type 2 diabetic. Like you're either insulin resistant, you don't respond to it, you don't make it, like you got to get away from it. And I was like, that's when the proteins and the healthy fats come in. And I love that you brought up so much about the healthy fats, specifically the mono and polyunsaturated fats and like the omega-3s, because that also just reduces inflammation. And if you can teach your body to run off of those healthy fats primarily, as opposed to just feeding those unhealthy mitochondria the glucose, you can really like increase the amount of brown fat you have. So what for a lot of the people who are interested in like the seed oil conversation, what are some examples of fats that maybe they can start decreasing from their diet and then start increasing in their diet for those folks who are like, oh, I've heard about this whole seed oil thing. Dr. Seager, what can we learn about this?
Seed oils are ubiquitous. They are in every processed food because they are so damn cheap. The origin of seed oils, if I'm remembering this right, was cottonseed oil. You're picking all this cotton, you got the seeds, and you don't know what to do with it. You'd love to feed it to the pigs or to the cows, but it's no good. Guess what? Cows aren't supposed to eat cotton, and neither are people. So instead of throwing the cotton seeds away, somebody, I forget who it was, Procter and Gamble or something like this, right? Some industrial era, and we think of them as a major brand now, figured out how to detoxify the oil in the cottonseed. They extracted it with hexane or benzene or something toxic. And then they promised you that they would rid the product of their extraction agent, detoxify the cotton. And now we're going to transestrify it and turn it into a substitute for shortening called Crisco and make people believe, by buying off the professional societies that say they are safeguarding and educating about nutrition, make people believe that it is somehow healthier. And it has been poisoning Americans ever since. But the mechanism of that poisoning is somewhat misunderstood. I mean, Paul Saladino's got a pretty good rap about get the seed oils out of your diet and how they get oxidized and they promote inflammation. And none of that is really wrong. And then Nick Norwitz comes along and says, well, they're not so bad. If you are metabolizing these seed oils and using them for energy, Nick has a point. Like you can metabolize them, you're going to oxidize them, they will be respirated, you'll breathe them out as carbon dioxide and water. And in that sense, they're benign. Also, linoleic acid and some of these, what we think of as seed oils, we do need some in our body. It's just we're getting like 20 times. Nobody's got a linoleic acid deficiency in this country because the seed oils are so damn cheap. Soybean, corn, safflower, sunflower. This is what we mean by the seed oils. And what is not getting enough attention is even when they are intact, they're not oxidized. They're not damaged. They've not been in the fryer for a week and a half at some restaurant where you enjoy your French fries. They are intact. They are still wrong for the construction of your body. Your brain runs on DHA. So this is an omega-3 fatty acid that is most abundant in seafood. And if the infant does not get enough DHA, the brain will not develop in a healthy, normal way because the brain is mostly fat. Fat is a building block of the body, not just, an energy dense metabolite. It is something that we construct our membranes and our nervous system from. We must give our body the right building blocks to ensure that the nervous system and the neurons and the cell membranes are all acting in the way that they're supposed to. This last part about seed oils, if we talk about it more, we're not worried about our cooking temperatures anymore. We're just not cooking with seed oils. Just get them the hell out. There's a difference between seed oil and fruit oil. And this took me a little bit of a time to appreciate. When we're talking about avocado oil, it's not coming out of the pit of the avocado. It's coming out of the fruit part that we would eat. And there's a word for it, like, I don't know, the endosperm or something. I'm not much of a botanist. But when we're talking about olive oil, it's not coming from the pit of the olive. It is coming from the part of the olive that we eat. So fruit oils are meant to be eaten, and they are healthier for the creatures that eat them than the seed oils. When you think about it, what plant is going to, propagate itself by being digested? There's no plant in the world. The seeds are protected from that digestion so that they can pass through all, 7 stomachs of the cow or however many they have, or through the bird and then be transported to some other area where they are deposited in the poop surrounded by nitrogen and ready to germinate. Seeds, of course, we have to crush them up into flour and then ferment them to make them edible. And when we go through all that trouble, the whole sourdough bread craze is actually kind of clever if it's real sourdough bread. When we prepare the seeds properly, they can still be good for us. But the ultra-processed food industry isn't going to do that. The ultra-processed food industry is not interested in your health. Most of the sourdough bread that you get at the grocery store tastes like sourdough without ever being fermented like sourdough. So it's phony. And that's what keeps it cheap. When you can increase the shelf life of a grocery good, you reduce the waste to the grocery store. Then you bring it home. We know it has an expiration date, but it never seems to go bad because bacteria and fungi, they don't want to digest it either. What is it doing inside to, your gastrointestinal tract, to the microflora? Most people don't realize that the DNA on which their entire metabolism relies doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the whole microbiome inside their intestinal tract that takes the food, which we're really incapable of metabolizing, and digests it for us so that when it's released into our bloodstream, it is in the form that our mitochondria can use: glucose, fatty acids. When the microbiome in your gastrointestinal tract is not right, when you have the wrong species and you're feeding them the wrong things, they cannot produce what I'm going to call the right fatty acids, the fatty acids that are healthy for your mitochondria to metabolize. And so metabolism begins in the gut and it finishes in the mitochondria. Not enough people realize that the mitochondria are downstream of the gut microbiome, and you need to get them the right mix of fatty acids that will support their healthy function. This is why when we do, I say when fecal transplants are performed on autistic children, they get a temporary remission or improvement in some of the stereotypical behaviors characteristic of autism. That is, we do a fecal transplant, or a clinician will do a fecal transplant, change the gut microbiome. That changes the profile of fatty acids in the bloodstream. That supports the mitochondrial function. But if you don't make a permanent alteration in the child's diet, then the mitochondria will revert to the previous damaged state because the gut is reverting to the previous damaged state. And it's really difficult to get an autistic child with sensory processing issues to eat a healthy diet. If you let them pick, they're just going to live on chicken nuggets and ketchup, because they don't process the signals of taste and texture the same way that everyone else does. Metabolism begins in the gut. It finishes in the mitochondria.
Do you think that, from a metabolism standpoint, do you think that decreasing overall metabolic rate could be one of the key markers for longevity, in a sense, reducing catabolism and reducing anabolism? Because I like it from the example of like a sloth and a sea turtle have some of the slowest metabolisms of any. I guess they're both mammals. Maybe sea turtle's mammal, maybe it's like a amphibian. They live the longest because like they're very slow to digest. They don't eat a lot of food. They don't move around a lot. So their anabolism's, pretty down. Their catabolism's down, low metabolic rate. But if you have someone, even like a field mouse, whose heart beats 300 times per minute, they live a very, very short life. And you had brought up before this idea of snacking, that it's relatively new. And there's no shortage of research even showing that the size of dinner plates has increased over the past 50, 60, 70 years. And people eat like 3,500 calories per day. They might only burn off 2,000 a day. People are getting considerably more unhealthy in the West. So therefore, their metabolisms are going up, basically just because anabolism is going up and catabolism is not going up. Do you think that with the whole fasting conversation, that exercise is awesome for us, but in general, if we kind of like decrease the amount of overall calories we're taking in, having a decent cap on the metabolism conversation, that could help us live a longer and healthier life?
I'm going to say yes and no. So the yes part is, if what you're eating is crap, eating less crap will help you have a longer life. And, there's lots of animal studies where they put the animals on caloric restriction and the animals live longer. Of course, these animals are all in captivity. Of course, they're leading unnatural lives. And of course, the calories that they're restricting are, lab mouse chow or whatever the hell it is. If what you're eating is crap, eating less crap will extend your life. However, I am not convinced that eating more good food, more healthy food, is somehow going to shorten the life of the individual. I haven't seen the study where they fed, the rodents salmon and eggs and, compare that to a chow caloric restricted diet. And I'm making that up. But the point is that ketosis is a healthy metabolic state. You can get to ketosis by eating a high fat diet. You cannot always get into ketosis eating a high protein diet because amino acids are the principal substrate of gluconeogenesis. So your body can make its own glucose as long as it has enough protein to work with. And I noticed this in my son. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 6 years old. And so we got the nutrition advice and we got the endocrinologist advice, and I kept scrupulous records of every shot, everything that he ate, all of his exercise. And he could have like a 0 carb, let's say a double cheeseburger with no ketchup, no bun, and 3 hours later, experience a blood glucose spike. I would show the dietitian and the endocrinologist the records, and they would tell me, well, that's not possible because, he didn't have any carbs. And it took me a minute to realize they thought I was lying to them. They thought my son must have been sneaking sweets or something that we never put in his journal. But that wasn't what was going on. gluconeogenesis is what was going on. He was converting the amino acids in the high protein meal into glucose in his bloodstream by the time his H, which is a fat-acting insulin, had already worn off. And I learned to give him more MPH to do it. If you're going to go keto and you can't figure out how your carnivore diet isn't popping your keto meter, it's because your carnivore diet has so much protein in it. Keto has to be high fat. And you know that high fat is also high caloric. You can go isocaloric with fat, but fat is a very dense food, caloric dense. And so now the question is, can you get the same longevity benefits from a high fat, low carbohydrate diet with moderate protein that you would get from caloric restriction? And some evidence says, yes, you can, that fasting or keto is mimicking the benefits of caloric restriction. So I'm coming at it like this. It's not how little you eat. It is the quality of the food that you do eat. And we should not be surprised that if you eliminate poor quality foods, you live longer. The difficulty is that human beings are such long-lived. I mean, under ordinary circumstances, it takes decades to do a longevity study with human beings. And that's why we do them in mice and, rabbits and other mammals with shorter lifetimes, because we can get a faster response in our experiment. Not everything translates over. But for me, it's not just the quantity of the life. It's, am I enjoying myself? Now, I like a good 24-hour fast. I also like a good ribeye steak. I also like a salmon fillet. And so I have this sort of no regret experience of eating healthy, high quality, especially if I can get them fresh, in-season foods. It has yet to be determined, how long I'm going to live. But Nana hated vegetables and she lived till she was 99. I think I ought to be able to beat her, We're going to see what happens.
No, it's a very fair way of saying that. I do think like you're playing the part of an honest scientist, and that's very much a role for someone who is in this field, because you have a lot of folks who may not be as scientifically or academically inclined who will go one direction really, really, really far and say, this is the only way and this is why I'm telling you this. And then they'll cherry pick studies. And it's funny because a lot of I think, carnivore diet folks or the keto folks will really put a big X mark above like the fruits and the vegetables. And then people are forgetting about the antioxidant properties of the vegetables and the fruits. And it's like, you probably don't need to be stuffing your face with fruits and veggies all day, but like having a modest amount for those antioxidant properties are amazing, because as we said in this discussion, oxidative damage is usually like the underlying mechanism which causes mitochondrial dysfunction, which causes things like cardiovascular disease and cancer.
Sean Baker looks great. He's carnivore and he's not going back. And I'm not criticizing him for it. If it's working for him, let it work. But my grandmother was not going to give up blueberries, in the late summer or something like that in Maine. You're darn right she went blueberry picking. Honey, maple syrup is another one that Saladino says can be good for you. In season, there is a role for what we might otherwise say, oh, that's a high carbohydrate, diet. We should avoid carbs. I'm not sure if our cold exposure is on point, if our sun exposure is on point, if we're getting some exercise and we're eating seasonally. Enjoy your watermelon. I think it's going to be okay to have apples in the fall or peaches during the summer. Now, I don't know how many peaches I could eat. I've never tested that. But sometimes when you pick it off the tree and you bite into it and you say, is this what a peach tastes like? Or you take a tomato out of your garden, you have no idea. What's in the grocery store is not in season. It was not picked fresh. It's there to optimize for least spoilage. So when we say fruit, we do have to distinguish between the blueberries that were flown up from Argentina, to land in the Phoenix grocery store in January, and the blueberries that you're picking off the bush when you go hiking wherever you live. I'm a big fan of seasonality because it tastes so amazingly good. I'm not going to give it up.
How do you how does this, the one big thing I wanted to talk with you about is, how does this all play into testosterone? Because I know you're a big proponent of discussing that, and that goes into obviously diet, exercise, and especially with the saunas and the cold plunges, because we parse that out. You'd rather do a sauna as opposed to a hot bath, so sauna's better, and then cold plunge. How does that deal with maybe young to middle-aged men who are concerned about their testosterone levels with respect to muscle protein synthesis, recreation if they want to have kids, or procreation, I guess I should say, if they want to have kids, keeping in mind that the organs, specifically the testicles, do thermoregulate maybe up to a certain point. Do you have any sort of protocol, any thoughts on this for a lot of my listeners who are really into the whole testosterone conversation?
Sauna will impair spermogenesis. That is, sauna will diminish your sperm count. It won't necessarily damage your testosterone, but if you're seeking to conceive, stay out of the sauna. I mean, probably every once in a while, no big deal for men. Women should just not sauna when they're seeking to conceive. So give that up around the time of ovulation. And once they know they're pregnant, stay the heck out of the sauna. Heat is much more dangerous for the body than cold is. It can be beneficial, but we're not going to do the sauna when we're trying to put ourselves in a reproductive state. Here's what has to happen, male or female, to make testosterone, to make any sex hormone. You got to get cholesterol. And if you're low in cholesterol, like so low because you're on statins or something, and your doctor's congratulating you on how low your cholesterol levels are, then you are sex hormone impaired, because cholesterol is the feedstock to pregnenolone. Cholesterol is the substrate from which all steroids are made. Okay. That cholesterol has to leave the bloodstream, has to get inside the cell. That's one membrane. Then it has to travel through the cell and it has to get into the mitochondria. That's the second membrane. And then the reaction that converts cholesterol to pregnenolone happens on the inner mitochondrial membrane. That's 3 membranes. If those membranes are messed up by seed oils, they will not transport the way that they're supposed to. And so the cholesterol, even if it's in your bloodstream, will not be available to the enzyme that converts it into pregnenolone inside your mitochondria. So why do we have, low testosterone rates among young men who are otherwise fit, even if they have good body composition, and they're still measuring out in like the 200s or 300s? It's not because they're obese or because they're old. It's because there are so many seed oils in their diet that the transport mechanisms across these membranes are messed up. They are not, their whole testosterone factory is running at like 25% because these transport mechanisms just aren't able to move the cholesterol the way they have to. So what do you need? You need more mitochondria, and you're going to need the metals that participate in the construction of enzymes for mitochondrial function. Predominantly, those are zinc and magnesium. Now, there's other ones, selenium and manganese, but zinc and magnesium are essential for the mitochondrial function that produces sex steroids in the body. You got to get more mitochondria, you got to get better mitochondrial function, and you have to get them the micronutrients that they need to perform that function. The good thing is it can change fast. That is, you might be down in the 200-300s. One guy, I got his lab reports. He added 600 nanograms per deciliter of total testosterone in less than 30 days. The seed oils will not leave your body that fast. It takes 2-3 years because these these phospholipids, they change over more slowly. But mitobiogenesis can happen fast. So if you get the seed oils out of your diet at the same time that you are starting a program of cold plunge therapy, the new mitochondria that you make, they will be constructed of the omega-3 fatty acids that you're now eating, that you're getting from fish that's in your diet, or healthy egg yolks, for example. Or perhaps you're taking a healthy supplement. And I don't endorse fish oil supplements because I don't know how to, check for the quality control. But I think fish is great. And there are other omega-3 supplements that you can get that will give your mitochondria during this phase of mitobiogenesis the building blocks that they need for healthy mitochondrial function. Men must exercise after the cold plunge to get the testosterone boost that they're looking for. It doesn't have to be a lot of exercise, but a little bit to restore blood flow to the limbs. If what they're looking for is a short-term boost, they will get it from cold plunge and exercise. I suspect that if they don't exercise, the mitobiogenesis will still, over the long haul, improve their testosterone levels. But the fastest, best results that I've seen are pre-cool a workout. Sometimes the workout is just rebounding and squats, a few lunges. It doesn't have to be a huge ordeal. Women don't have to exercise. Women make testosterone in 4 different places in the body. Men do too, but the testes are so important to male levels that the testes dominate. In women, it's the ovaries, but the ovaries are only like 25% of total testosterone production. It's also the adrenal glands, the fat cells, and the skin cells. Now, adrenals, fat, and skin, the best way to stimulate activity in all 3 of those areas is a cold plunge. So in the little data that we have, it shows that when women get cold, they get an instant boost in testosterone. If you're going to go, with your wife or your girlfriend into the cold plunge together, and about 2 minutes in, she gets like a little twinkle in her eye. Testosterone is the lust hormone. And I'm telling you, Mike, go with it. Don't be confused about what is happening. Remember this podcast and be like, aha, because I've had this experience where I was in this enormous argument with this woman that I was dating, but we had a photo shoot and we agreed to do it. And we couldn't even look at each other except that we had to do this for the camera. And then she started chuckling and then she started smiling. And about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, she leaned in and she kissed me. We started making out in the ice bath because I had the presence of mind to go with it. But then I'm like, what just happened? I had to get to the library. I had to figure all this out. When you ice bath with your partner, you create the neurotransmitters and hormones of love. It's not just lust. It's also familial attachment. So that would be vasopressin and oxytocin. And it's also the dopamine and the norepinephrine that is typically associated, with having like a grade school crush on somebody. All of these brain systems are activated and you can't help. Like the ice bath is practically a love potion for a couple that is doing it together, breathing together, doing the eye contact, and stimulating the production of all these neurotransmitters. There's a tip.
That's amazing. I didn't expect it to go that far. And I think like that was the real world application there of like 2 people can really benefit from that thing together. Because I think that right now, at least in the social media sphere, as when we kick things off, you're saying, oh, like cold plunges really reached the peak about last year. And now people just for social media clicks are like barking on either side. But if you're saying like, hey, like here's this incredible data and here is how you can have this in your life, not only for you, but for your partner, or if you have like friends or family members who are looking to conceive or literally just get healthier or like decrease cancer risk, why not? If it only is going to take 2 or 3 minutes, I mean,
Exactly.
there's no reason not to do it. I've done some cold showers in the past, like in the wintertime up in like Philadelphia. And I mean, it is so blistering cold, but like the first few hours of my day are amazing. Like I just feel like cleansed. It's the only word I can
cold
say.
Showers. There is a difference between a cold shower and an ice bath. When you do whole body, you get the dive reflex. In a cold shower, it's all that fight or flight. You get some gasp reflex, like, and then you get a lot of energy and you're ready for a fight, but you never get that calm, meditative, slow your heart rate down effect that happens in the ice bath. And there's some good research out of Finland on this. But if all you have is the cold shower, do the cold shower. You don't have to be in there for 4 or 5 minutes. Just do 30 seconds. Finish your shower on cold and you will feel unbelievable when you've like accomplished that. I just let it when I'm traveling and I'm in a hotel or something, keep the cold water off the top of my head, but I let it on the back of my neck and my shoulders and all down my back. I might turn around and do the front as well. But when I do a cold shower, it's typically, I'm looking to get it on the brown fat that might be between my shoulder blades.
That's perfect. That's like the best protocol. I'm gonna try that out today.
All right.
Is there just in the interest of time, is there anything else you want to close off with? This was brilliant. Thank you for sharing all this. I want also, like, where can people find you as well?
Like, you can read all of this stuff. I've got the Uncommon Testosterone book, that's on Amazon. So you can buy it there. I got Uncommon Cold, which is up on our morozcoforge.com website. So if you need, the hard copy because you like to write in the margins or put Post-it notes all over the place like I do, then do that. But everything that I've written is online at morozcoforge.com. It's free. You can browse it. Like, the time that I wrote it, it takes me a long time to compile those articles into something that is an entertaining and informative book. But there are hundreds of scientific citations in here for the people who are really curious about what the data says. You can also buy an ice bath on morozcoforge.com. It's not the cheapest way to do it. The cheapest way is to go to Alibaba, type in cold plunge. And if what you really want to do is save a lot of money, get some, Chinese piece of crap drop shipped to your house that works for 5 or 6 weeks and only costs you several $100s. Our customers are not price sensitive. They are quality sensitive. They want the grounding. They want the ice, not just cool water, but ice in there. They want to be able to add the Epsom salt so they can get as close as possible to swimming in the cold Pacific Ocean or something, even though, I live in an apartment building in Phoenix, Arizona. It takes me 5 hours to drive to San Diego if I want to go jump in the ocean. I don't need to. I got the next best thing to nature right on my balcony. So for those people who are looking for quality or they appreciate value over price, Morosco Forge is there for them.
Oh, it's awesome. I'll make sure to link that down in the description, and I'm excited to dive into your books after this
Thanks.
discussion. That was brilliant.
I'm
Thank you
glad.
for thank you for coming on today, Dr. Seager. This was great.
This has been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Sure.